The hospital seemed to be overflowing with bodies, awaiting burial. Today, we delve into the harrowing reality of Andersonville Prison, a place that became synonymous with hell on earth during the American Civil War. We will uncover the stories of those who endured, those who attempted to escape, and those who perished within its walls. We will also discuss the aftermath, the responsibility, and the legacy of this dark chapter in American history. If you find this video interesting, please support us by hitting the like button. Now, let's get started. The American Civil War, commencing in 1861, stands as one of the most tragic wars in American history. In this war, fellow American citizens turned against each other and caused countless casualties on their own soil. But, have you ever wondered if many of the Civil War's victims met their fate in places other than the battlefields? One such place is Andersonville Prison, built in 1864 in southern Georgia at the height of the Civil War. Constructed by the Confederate Army, Andersonville Prison became notorious for its dire conditions and was meant to detain Union soldiers during the Civil War. Reports suggest that Confederate soldiers themselves struggled to procure sufficient weapons, food, or even housing, let alone provide for the prisoners. Andersonville Prison was specifically designed to incarcerate Union soldiers who were captured by the Confederate Army. What kind of life awaited them? It is a place so horrific, it deserves to be called hell. First, let's take a look at the Andersonville Prison, focusing on the testimony of Union soldier Prescott Tracy. Tracy was interned at Andersonville Prison as a prisoner of war in August 1864. According to his testimony, there were 28,000 Union soldiers inside the prison fence at the time, and it was so crowded that they were unable to move. In fact, the prison held 3 times as many Union soldiers as it was planned to hold at its highest point, with each inmate allocated only about 5 feet by 6.5 feet of space. Moreover, there are no records of any substantial structures, and contemporary paintings depicting the conditions suggest that the camp was in a constant state of disarray. Tracy describes the situation this way: some of us managed to create makeshift roofs from scraps of blankets we possessed. It was the only protection we had from the sun and rain, and we had to stay in the harsh conditions day and night. It seems that the prisoners lived mostly in the open, with only a simple tent-like structure made of boatcloth inside the prison fence. Not only did the prisoners have no shelter from the rain and dew, but they also had few decent clothes. At the time, the protracted Civil War caused a shortage of all kinds of supplies. Under such circumstances, it was not expected that the enemy prisoners of war would be provided with decent living conditions. Most prisoners were clad in tattered rags, with many left completely unclothed. Tracy describes the conditions he witnessed as follows: the condition of the men's clothing was generally miserable. Few wore shoes, and many prisoners of war were without clothing. A few had coats and trousers, but they were only able to wear them for the short time they had been in prison. And it was not only clothing that was in short supply. During the war, both armies were not well supplied, and food was in serious short supply, especially in the Confederate Army. Even soldiers in the field had little access to food, and providing adequate food to prisoners of war was impossible. In addition, the distribution of rations was unequal, with reports in some cases indicating a complete lack of food. Under these circumstances, even the poorest rations were precious to the POWs, who ate them up in no time at all. Unsuccessful escape plan. It was only natural that prisoners in such a hellish prison would want to escape somehow. Immediately after the prison was built, and the first prisoners were interned, there were those who immediately tried to escape. The escape plan was seemingly straightforward: scale the prison walls and flee to freedom. A dozen or so prisoners of war tied their clothes together into a long rope and attempted to climb the prison's high walls, which were about 15 feet high. However, they were captured by Confederate soldiers, and their escape was unsuccessful. This escape attempt led to the creation of the deadline at Andersonville Prison. The deadline was a basic fence, approximately 4 feet high, erected within the entire perimeter of Andersonville Prison. It was a simple fence constructed of sheets and wire. without any mechanisms to induce electric shocks upon contact. The Confederate soldiers guarding the dead line were ordered to shoot prisoners of war if they crossed this fence, or even touched it. The dead line was a warning fence that anyone approaching or attempting to escape over the fence would be killed. Touching the dead line, even unintentionally, resulted in being shot without mercy. Even those who were caught in the crossfire or hit by stray bullets were killed. Thus, the deadline became a dominating and frightening presence, deterring prisoners from even approaching it. The establishment of the deadline ended any hope of escaping beyond the prison fence. Nevertheless, many prisoners formed small groups to cooperate and attempted to escape in various ways. One such plan was to escape by pretending to be a corpse. Many people died in the prison every day, and their bodies were taken outside the fence. The prisoners of war, keenly observing this situation, decided to lie still among the corpses of their fallen comrades and wait to be carried away. Once they were safely transported to the mass graves, they would get up at the break of day and start running. And, to their surprise, some of them actually succeeded in escaping. The guards, who were aware of this plan, then began to have doctors examine all the bodies. However, even those who managed to get out of the prison through these various plans, weakened by the poor conditions, often did not have the strength to escape completely. Most escapees either ran out of strength from the rain and wind, were captured and brought back to live out their lives in chains, or were shot to death. According to Confederate records, the number of prisoners who managed to escape was 351, constituting about 0.7% of the total inmates, with only 32 of them recorded as having successfully returned to the Union lines. Other missing deserters may have lost their lives somewhere or escaped without returning to the Union Army, details of which are not known. Poor medical facilities. Andersonville had a medical facility, but it was inadequately equipped, staffed, and medicated, leaving them at their wits' end. At this time, the average number of deaths in the hospital was about 30 per day. The situation worsened further, and the death toll continued to rise. Eventually, the average daily death toll rose to more than 130, with the highest number recorded as 146 deaths in a single day. The staggering daily death toll led to the hospital being overwhelmed with bodies, each awaiting burial. Thus, the overwhelming number of deaths meant that burial work could not keep pace, forcing the Confederates to compel the prisoners of war to undertake this task. POWs were forced to dig holes in which to bury their comrades of yesterday, and in which they might eventually be buried. The holes were not dug to bury the corpses one by one, but rather were a long series of shallow trenches. The dead were lined up in rows of several dozen, covered with clay slabs, and buried at once. There were no coffins, no prayer rituals. Day after day, the POWs continued to dig holes where only bodies were buried. Pride as a Union soldier. The prison conditions were so harsh and degrading that the prisoners were forced to spend their days in hell, knowing that the next person to die might be themselves. There was no one who did not want to escape from this situation. Somehow, to get out of here as soon as possible. In such a situation, the Confederate Army, facing a shortage of troops, proposed an unexpected exchange to the prisoners of war. They offered freedom and money on the condition that they pledge allegiance to the Confederate Army and become Confederate soldiers. For POWs living in prisons without food or clothing, filled with excrement, disease, and the fear of death, this offer must have seemed like a dream come true. So, how many Union soldiers accepted the offer and decided to leave the prison to join the Confederate troops? According to Tracis records, not a single Union soldier accepted the offer. Not one of them pledged false allegiance to the Confederacy, even though they would have been free and would have received the money. They valued their loyalty to the Union Army above their own lives, maintaining their allegiance despite enduring immense suffering. Perhaps the harsh treatment experienced by the prisoners at the hands of the Confederacy intensified their loyalty to the Union. The atrocities committed at Andersonville prison began to be publicized through news reports and photographs near the end of the Civil War. American poet Walt Whitman, having met with freed prisoners of war and learned about the conditions of the prison, declared that while some acts and crimes may be forgivable, the atrocities at Andersonville were irredeemable. It is indeed perplexing and disheartening to witness fellow Americans, bound by a common language and shared humanity, committing such inhumane acts against one another. People at the time must have wondered why they had done such terrible things. The crime of war crimes. The question of who was responsible for these crimes was then turned to one person. That person was Henry Wirtz, a Confederate captain at Andersonville. Wirtz was perhaps the most hated man in American history. 2 days before the end of the Civil War, Wirtz was captured and immediately put on trial for war crimes committed at Andersonville prison. Over 100 witnesses testified, leading to Wirtz receiving a death sentence for causing the deaths of more than 13,000 Union soldiers. In November 1865, about 6 months after the war ended, Wirtz was publicly executed in a prison in Washington, D.C., in front of a large crowd of onlookers. Just before he was to be hanged, Wirtz is said to have said to one of the officers there, "I have been attacked because I have obeyed orders. I am being attacked because I was merely following orders. I was only following orders from my superiors, and the responsibility should not be mine alone." Wirtz's words before his execution prompted reflection on his actions, and raised questions about who truly bore responsibility for the criminal acts committed during the war. Many perceived Wirtz as the embodiment of evil in Andersonville, accusing him of evading responsibility with his claim that he was merely following orders. Some Southerners, however, stood by his, "I was just following orders," and felt that it was unfair that he was tried and hanged. So, in an attempt to clear Wirtz's name, a monument was erected in his honor in 1908, about a mile from the camp. This monument remains today as one of the few Confederate monuments. Is it possible that Wirtz was made the sole scapegoat to bear the burden of the tragedy at Andersonville prison? Even if he was made a scapegoat, his actions were undeniably heinous, amounting to mass murder, and there are compelling arguments supporting the notion that Wirtz rightly faced trial. But is it enough if he is executed? What about those who gave him the orders? This situation raises profound questions that continue to resonate in contemporary discussions and trials related to war crimes. Contemporary war crimes trials reference the Wirtz decision as a significant precedent, underscoring the importance of individual accountability. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more insightful content. Take care and see you in the next video. Goodbye.